just because you validate somebody else's experience doesn't mean you're invalidating your own.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I just love to remember that when I am in partnership with somebody else, because I get the opportunity, I get the beauty of learning somebody else's experience and then being there to support them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, like, and we talked about this when you came on our podcast, Dave, but with the two in me that's so strong, like when I get into interrelation with somebody else, it's actually hard for me to figure out like where I am and to get in touch with, because it's such a early learned behavior. I so automatically jump into reading the other person and like, okay, so who do I need to be right now? How do I need to act? What do they need me to say? Which kind of side of me is going to show up?
Hey everyone, welcome to 2021. We have put last year behind us and we are looking towards a fresh start and a clean slate in a brand new year. Are you the type of person that sets a goal, a resolution, or an intention? Me personally, I set an intention every single year. And the last few years, I've chosen a word of the year. Things like connection, collaboration, and last year's word was growth. When I look back on 2020, I reflect and I think, did I actually meet my goals of growth? Well, if I ask myself that question, the answer would be no, because I didn't meet the goals that I had set for myself. Working on my financial pillar specifically, working on growing my business. But when I look at it as an entire year, reflecting back on my word of the year, which was growth, and my intention for the year, and I ask myself the same question, then the answer surely is yes. I did a hell of a lot of growing last year. I grew personally, I grew professionally, I grew through the podcast, I grew through a new relationship. I did a whole lot of growth in 2020. So I'm not measuring my year in success on how well I grew or how much I grew. I simply just reflect back on it and take a look at the year as a whole and how much growth I experienced myself. Not measured against anyone else, not measured against the year before, but not so much as it pertains to my own personal worth. And that's the area where I grew the most in, is detaching my own personal worth from the success and failures of my business or of my career or of my parenting or of my relationships. If I were just to do a whole lot of analyzing of my measurables and tangibles in my life, I would constantly be hearing my inner critic and hearing myself beat me up. Like, we are our own worst critic, right? And I needed to move away from that bad behavior. So as we jump into a new year with a new mindset, my word of the year is all in. I'm all in here on the podcast. I'm all in my relationship. I'm all in my businesses. And that word of the year, the setting of the intention, helps me stay on track with what I'm looking forward to getting out of my year. I didn't actually write down very many goals this year. Simply just put a framework around what does all in mean to me. And then I just check in with myself over the course of the year. Am I on track? Am I staying all in? Am I staying present? Am I being intentional about my choices and my decisions and what I want to do with this opportunity that we have in front of us for 2021? So with that being said, I wanted to invite you guys to become a member of our private virtual group, which is working on reflecting on 2020 and intentions this week in our men's group. And we are going to work our way through a brand new year with the support that those members are looking for, whether that be a new mindset in a relationship or building new friendships with like-minded individuals. Or if you're looking for a little bit more personal growth and self-awareness through the Enneagram, attachment theory, and love languages to call in your ideal relationship, that's what we're here for, you guys, is to create a safe space for you to connect with other people who are headed in the right direction you are. So are you all in with me in 2021? If so, click the link in the show notes below and apply to become a member of our private virtual group meeting that connects once a week via Zoom. And in between those weeks, you'll get access to a private chat group for the community where you guys can give each other support. We're building connections, we're building friendships, and we're supporting each other on our journeys to finding that ideal relationship. Today's episode is by far one of my favorites. I cannot wait to bring it to you guys today. Leanna and Jared from the Hello and Goodbye podcast join me to talk about so much good stuff centered around the Enneagram, attachment styles, and bringing a new consciousness to your relationship. We're going to dig deep into where's the fine line between being too helpful and just being supportive. Additionally, why do we do so much work when we're single so that when we get into a relationship, what happens then? We discuss a little bit about how conflict shows up for the type 2, the 7, and the 8 on the Enneagram, because those are the types that are represented on today's episode. And why do our parents show up so great with their grandkids? And we spent our childhood or our young adulthood thinking to ourselves, where was that when I was a kid? Well, we discuss all of these topics and so much more on a wonderful episode with the co-hosts of Hello and Goodbye podcast. If their message resonates with you, please don't hesitate to reach out to them on Instagram and check out the episode where I was honored to be a guest that came and spoke to them about the type 7, the type 2, and their attachment styles. So without further delay, let's get into today's episode with Leanna and Jared from the Hello and Goodbye podcast. Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. I'm truly enjoying the conversation with Leanna and Jared from the Hello and Goodbye podcast. You guys aren't privy to what we were just talking about, but we're going to get into it. So welcome everyone. These are my two favorite Enneagram and attachment style fans. How are you guys today?
We're good.
Great. Yeah,
Thank you
we're
for
both
having us.
Yeah, we're so excited to be here.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I was so grateful to have been a guest on your podcast. Also, I really enjoyed listening to both the intro that you guys did that day. I was laughing my ass off, and also, kind of listening back on our conversation, and I'm like, oh, that was such bad advice.
Really?
No, not at all.
Okay.
I was going to say, we felt the opposite.
Yeah, it was I loved that episode. Yeah, we were very grateful to have you on. So yeah, we appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks again. Why did you guys start the Hello and Goodbye podcasts? Clue me in.
Yeah, so technically it's like my show, and it's funny, we actually just did like an episode on where are you laughing? We did an episode on the beginnings of Hello and Goodbye and kind of like did a flashback of like how that started. So basically I had been married for 8.5 years in my 20s and went through a really painful divorce and got into the dating world when I shouldn't have been in the dating world. Made a lot of mistakes, got hurt really bad, met a lot of shitty men, had one really abusive relationship. I mean, just like turmoil after turmoil. But in all of that, Jared was such a good friend to me. We had been friends for about 5-6 years now, I think 5 or 6 years. And, he was the one that I would go to when I was like just a mess, and he would listen to me and give me advice. And anyway, so I just had some of the stories I just realized, and with Jared's help, that they were hilarious. Like they were hilarious stories that you would never think would happen to anybody. And I had kind of like in my head, like I was like, should I start a blog? Like, how do I like get this out there to like help people who are going through the same thing that could probably relate to it? And I was at a physical therapy appointment, and I was talking to my physical therapist again about another date that had gone bad. And I had been talking for like 45 minutes straight. And he goes, you should just do a podcast. And I had been thinking about it for a while, and I was like, you know
So
what?
this is your this is your physical therapist. You know, just because there's the name therapist in his title
Yes, this is
doesn't
my
mean
physical therapist. I told my therapist I was cheating on her with him.
got it. And
Yeah.
Jared's the other part of this open relationship that you had going on.
Yes,
with
Jared. Yeah, exactly.
who you go to for advice.
Jared was the mistress.
Yeah, I'm like the fifth table leg of this whole structure here. Yeah.
So anyway, that day, like for some reason, it just kind of struck a chord with me. And you know, I'm Enneagram 7. And I just like went all in, and I like invested with my savings, and I found a producer and, you know, paid for music and did a photo shoot. And I was trying to figure out how to do it, because I didn't want it to just be me talking to myself for every episode. And I was trying to figure out who I knew that could be like a partner with me. And Jared, a girlfriend of mine suggested Jared. And so I contacted him and propositioned him to be a partner in it. And he was at a time in his life where that wasn't the best decision for him. So he was like, how about I'll just be there when you need me and I can come on the show. And so we coined him my sidekick for the first few months. And then I officially promoted him to co-host. And so
you're
yeah,
going places in this world, Jared.
moving up in the world.
And my listeners just love him. They love Jared, and it just wouldn't be the same show without him. So yeah, so we launched our first episodes on February 14th, and it's been kind of like a wild ride. It's been exciting though.
Yeah, I would agree. And I'm really proud of like, you know, that the podcast, one of the things Leanna said on an episode a few months ago that I loved is just, hey, like this is real and vulnerable content from like two people who have no idea what they're doing, you know? And, you know, like we're out here sort of doing our best and we're honest. We talk about our experiences in dating and relationships, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And, you know, it's interesting because I have a master's in counseling psychology. I have a PhD in education. So I work with college students. I'm not a licensed clinician, but I work in a counseling like and kind of advising and coaching and guiding capacity a lot. And that was really sort of more of my role to have some credential at the beginning, but now it's more like, you know, the podcast has really evolved to us just being real and being vulnerable and talking about what's happening with us. And so one of the things, you know, that I wrote in my intro to have Leanna introduce me, which she made fun of me relentlessly for, is just that like one of the first things I wrote is like, I'm your friend and I've dated a lot of people. And I'm like, well, that's as good of a credential as any to be on a dating and relationship podcast, right? So
yeah, life experience goes so much further than like a classic education.
Yes,
yeah, for sure. I'm about to turn 40 in February, and never been married, no children. I've had a series of like longer relationships of multiple years, but I have really dated a lot of people, and I've found I'm very sort of functional and successful and happy in just about all areas of my life. And kind of intimacy and relationships is the thing that I've kind of continued to work on. And having the podcast where I can be open about that, and our listeners are like a really cool community and kind of hit us up and we keep the conversation going. And so that's been really cool for me too, you know?
Yeah, that is really cool. And you sound a lot like I sounded in the very beginning, Jared, of like, you know, I don't really want to start my own podcast. I'd rather just be a guest on other people's podcasts. And you started to set a boundary with Leanna, and she wore you down and eventually promoted you to co-host.
Well, and you know, like that was really welcome. I think it was the right decision at the time, where she had this passion and she had this idea, and I think like I knew, and we both, as we talked about it, agreed that like partnership was not the right thing there, because then we would have been like wrestling each other for control, for the direction of the show, for what do we talk about, you know. And I was just really happy to be like, hey, like, I'm your friend. Like, you've got a vision. Like, I want to see you do your thing and kill it and be successful. And like, I'll support you. I think the words I used were like, give me a tryout for a few episodes. Cause it was important to me to give Leanna the out of like, yeah, dude, this isn't working. Like, you know, you're like talking too much or whatever it is. Right.
And, it's interesting too, the show has developed so much. Like I've had such an interesting journey from my divorce of a very conservative Christian relationship to like discovering myself and my sexuality and like going to a much more liberal place in my life and being able to be okay with that and like not feel shame for that. And so in the beginning of the podcast, I needed this space where I was like sexy and like posting like on my Instagram, posting all these like body positive pictures and like needing to like be the star and needing it to be about me. And that has changed so much because I've realized that like I had that moment and it was nice, but that's like not what I want, and what I wanted was friendship and to like be vulnerable, because really the whole idea of the podcast was to be able to share my life and my story, which is a crazy ass story, eventually with time, to help people, to like really help people. And it just went in a different direction than I thought it would. I thought it was going to be more just me talking about all these like sexual experiences or guys being dicks and all this stuff. And then it was like, oh, okay, well, I have all these other stuff that's like way more powerful to hear and like can actually help people, and Jared again has just like, he said a lot of things throughout that I was like, no. And then like he wore me down. And then he wore me down. Like he always used to tell me like, stop editing so much. And I'm like, shut up. I'm editing as much as I want to. And I would spend like 7 hours editing every week. And then I realized like, I cannot fucking do that. Like I have like 2 other jobs I'm running. And so now I don't edit as much. And then he was like, we should really do an episode about like where I interview you, like a little bit about your life. And I was like, nobody wants to hear that. And then we did it. And it's like one of our fan favorite episodes, and so it's really just been this really great journey. And I'm very grateful for it.
Yeah, I can resonate with that so much. I had considered having a co-host in the very beginning, but I did understand that like juggling my schedule plus a co-host plus the guest would have just been an absolute nightmare for me. And that's why I reach out to expert guests and people like yourselves so that we can connect and collaborate and still share different opinions and viewpoints without me having that third schedule in play.
Yeah.
And Jared, I didn't know that you had your PhD, and it's almost a benefit or a positive thing that like you're not a clinician, because you can disclose more than say like our other guests who come on. They're like, okay, here are my boundaries around what I'll share about my personal life. You have the flexibility and freedom to do that within your professional career and now your personal life too.
Yeah, it's funny. That's been cool. It's been a little bit scary, like I work at a university and I have an administrative role as well as I teach as well. And so it was interesting when one of the students who was in a class I was teaching in the spring was like, my girlfriend turned me onto the podcast and it's really great. And we love you and Leanna and blah, blah. And I was like, oh no, but I also, I'm also at a place in my life where, I'm kind of okay with being open. Like I don't have things to hide in that way. So that actually has been really nice. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was teaching on your college campus for a little while as well, about a year ago, maybe a little longer than that. I had an affiliate professor role teaching some weight training and ultimate conditioning class. So it got me out of my comfort zone a couple days a week. And the students knew about the podcast and they would listen in. But I came across John Kim's singles group on Facebook. It's called Single on Purpose. And he mentioned it on our podcast when I interviewed him. And so I joined, and then I started like commenting and becoming a contributing member in the group. And a couple of people in that group were like, "Oh my God, I'm totally fangirling. Dave is in this group. Like, I've listened to your podcast." I'm like, wow, I had no idea that the reach would go that far and that that it would be that helpful. I just thought, like Leanna, I would throw out my dirty laundry and people would eat it up. But then I started to understand that's only part of the puzzle. Am I right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And it's not the important part, you know? It's the part that's like, it's
part,
the
that's
surface.
for sure.
Yeah, exactly. It's the surface entertaining part, but it's not the part that's really going to impact people, you know?
Right. Yeah. I'll share a personal story of mine. I went out with this girl 2 or 3 times. She goes to my church, but not the same campus. We're connected on a lot of different areas of our lives through fitness. And we talked about another podcast that's really popular. I shared my opinions on it. And she's like, "Yeah, Dave, I listened to yours. It was too helpful."
Huh.
And
What
I
does that
started to
mean?
think, I started to ask myself, like, what does that mean? And the difference between a listener who's listening to a podcast like just about dating stories or like the surface level stuff, they might be escaping into somebody else's world.
Yeah.
Whereas the too helpful quotation marks to being too helpful is like getting to the root of what Leanna was talking about earlier, of like just running into a string of a lot of guys that aren't the right fit. Well, I understood that I wanted to find out why that was in my own life. And that's what I share here on the podcast.
Yeah.
How's that land with you?
Yeah, totally. I've had actually one of my girlfriends, she texted me after we did a episode on conflict with Dr. Morgan.
Love
and her. Yeah, we're like obsessed. I'm obsessed with Dr. Morgan. But anyway, she was like, "Ugh, I hate that you guys put out that episode because now I have to deal with my shit." Like the episode just like struck so much with her, like in her current relationship that she's in. And now she's realizing, that's something she has to deal with.
Yeah, our next few episodes are going to be all about conflict and communication styles. So I love that thread on how much it helped me working on that stuff when I wasn't in a relationship, so that when I do get into a relationship, I'm just better equipped with better tools.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
But
Jared,
then when
Jared
you
wants to jump in.
well, then when you do get into the relationship though, like then it's like you're sort of starting over in a way, because it's one thing, because I've had that journey, so many iterations of that, where you're doing the work yourself while you're not with anybody, and you gain this insight, and you can kind of feel things shifting, and you develop greater self-awareness or whatever. And then somehow you get into something with somebody and it hits all of your trigger points, and you go right back into like your typical patterns of behavior. And so I think for me it's been really interesting, like the challenge that happens at both of those phases, where as much as I think like I'm ready, like I'm different, like the same old thing's not going to happen, and then all of a sudden like 2 weeks in I'm like, wait, I'm doing this, I'm rushing ahead, I'm like not setting boundaries, I'm doing all these things all over again. And it's been really nice for me, having had a few experiences just in the initial phases of dating recently, where I've been able to even just catch myself, say what I need, like recalibrate internally and all that stuff. But it's really hard, and you have to do both,
Totally. I totally love that you brought that up, because that's exactly what I experienced this fall. Is I was grounded, I was centered, and then we bring another person into our lives who has a different story and a different identity and a different concept of what healthy and a ideal relationship feels like to them. And then you trying to meet in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
And even if we've done all this personal work when we're out of a relationship, we still have to do that work, like you're talking about, that communication and that work in the relationship too, for it to thrive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which is like so much harder.
So much harder because you have another person's opinions to, what did I see earlier today? Maybe it was Dr. Fedrick from Arizona. She said, just because you validate somebody else's experience doesn't mean you're invalidating your own.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I just love to remember that when I am in partnership with somebody else, because I get the opportunity, I get the beauty of learning somebody else's experience and then being there to support them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, like, and we talked about this when you came on our podcast, Dave, but with the two in me that's so strong, like when I get into interrelation with somebody else, it's actually hard for me to figure out like where I am and to get in touch with, because it's such a early learned behavior. And I think for me in my life, and I think I've got some, like early trauma stuff around this too, where I so automatically jump into reading the other person and like, okay, so who do I need to be right now? How do I need to act? What do they need me to say? Which kind of side of me is going to show up? And I do that so automatically without any awareness, that it's really hard. Like that's been a real challenge for me over the past couple of years of being able to even tune into that and being like, wait, am I doing this because it's really the most authentic expression of myself, or am I doing this because I'm sort of sensing and knowing that this is how, that if I show up like this, it will be really welcome to the other person,
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and Leanna, you have some of that too, I think.
Yeah. So this is, I don't know. Do you want to jump into the Enneagram conversation now?
Absolutely. Like Jared brought up the point of being conscious in your relationship. Like, how is my behavior coming across both to myself and to the other people that I'm in relationship with? That's like the biggest conscious statement I've heard, or I couldn't have put it better myself on 2.5 years of hosting a podcast, but Jared just nailed it there. So yeah, let's talk. Jared brought up his helper personality type, and you're the enthusiast, Leanna. So let's jump into your experience.
Yeah. So what's interesting, and we talked about this on your episode, but my highest score was a 2. And then I was a 7, but we talked about how 2s and 7s are often mistyped, right? So I figured out why I typed as a 2. And it only shows up in relationships because I feel like to earn the other person's love, I have to do things. Like that's like, I have to, like, if I make them snacks and write little notes and do all of these things to like earn their love, then they'll love me. Like, and so it's like and if they don't respond to that, like if they don't respond positively to all the nice things that I do for them, I'm fucking pissed, And like, wouldn't you say that's like characteristic of the 2?
Yeah, definitely the resentment builds within the 2 when their needs aren't met because they're meeting other people's needs. It's also a tendency of the anxiously attached style.
Oh, well, that's probably it too.
I was just thinking about this the other day of like, the podcast originally started with Enneagram in mind. And then through my own personal growth journey, I've found even deeper awareness into the attachment theory as well. And we cannot just compartmentalize into the Enneagram alone. Like that's only going to give us one perspective on how to remove the mask. So then now, because my consciousness has gotten to a point where it's at. I want to bring the attachment theory into my relationship, into my podcast, into my daughter's life as well. Like, I told her about my new partner and she's like, oh, okay. What is she like? I'm like, she's very kind, brought my daughter into my world. And I opened up the conversation with my 18-year-old and I said, Maddie, when I tell you those things, what comes up for you? And she shared a little bit about her new boyfriend. And I'm like, oh, that's really great. By the way, I've just finished reading this book called Attached. Would you like to read it with me? I think it would give you a lot of insight into what you were just talking about, how you feel anxious around relationships.
Mm.
And so it can't just be
I love that.
right?
Yeah.
Wait, what did she
Like,
say? Is she like, yeah, give me the book?
She's finishing a book by James Clear called Atomic Habits right now, that she was given to by a psychology professor that she has. And then she definitely promised to read Attached after that.
Nice.
Man, if I had read that book at 19, like I don't know, maybe it wouldn't have hit, but like there's so many things I wish I had gotten so much earlier in my life that I would have made me realize,
Mm-hmm.
like why I was acting the way I was, or if I was in a healthy relationship or not, or if I was in the right relationship for me. And that's amazing. I love that so much.
Yeah, it was a first for me. It was really scary, but it's really helped our relationship so much to be adults and to have conversations. On Father's Day this year, like brought it up. Hey, Maddie, what do you want our relationship to be like now that you're turning 18 soon, I'm turning 40 soon. So we're hitting these milestones together, and she's off to college, which means she has more priorities than just me and family.
Mm-hmm.
And she's so glad to be left leaving high school behind.
Mm-hmm.
But
that.
Adult relationships is what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not so much to understand that she's a 9 to help deepen our relationship. It's also, oh, well, what was your experience as a child that I had influence in, that we can talk now about adults and end this generational trauma that we're going through.
Aww. Jared, are you both being jealous over there too of this relationship?
I mean, it's super interesting. Yeah, I mean, but I had the experience. So my parents got divorced when I was 14, and there was definitely some rocky years. And I think what you're describing, Dave, is like, I didn't have as beautiful a moment as you're describing with my parents, and certainly with my dad, but slowly and over time that transition did happen where, it changes when you relate to each other as adults. And my father's a different person than the man I grew up with completely. And I wouldn't change our relationship that we have now for anything in the world, but there was some years where it was like really tough and really confusing, because my dad was like a scary, angry guy when I was growing up. And then I would like see him with my sister's kids being this incredibly like loving, playful, doting grandfather. And me and my sister would like look at him and be like, who is this guy? Like, where did he come from? But I think that's one of the beautiful things about that, like, intergenerational piece,
Yeah, we hope to change over time. And it's quite a possibility that the grandparents have it so good because they can play and they can educate and they can just love on these grandkids and then detach when the kids just go home.
Yep.
There's that removal of all of the responsibility being on their shoulders of raising children. Okay, well, now I can just be present with my grandkids.
Yeah. It's amazing when you see, I've seen like uncles and people do this at like weddings and family reunions or whatever, like when older people, and particularly older men, just like they become a kid, and when they play with when they're playing with like the 5-year-olds or the whatever that are running around. And it's this, I think it's this beautiful thing as men that we it's very hard for us to drop like sort of, I know what's going on, and you know, like, let me tell you about what I'm good at and all of this stuff, and to just like totally drop it and become playful and childlike. And I'm always looking for ways to do that in my life as well, and even in how I relate to friends and partners and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I got really good advice from my own men's coach recently of like playing games with your partner is a tremendous way for you to embody what you're just talking about, of like leaving behind this dysfunctional masculinity where we got to be tough exteriors and even tougher interior,
Hmm.
even tougher interiors, and just play a game, you know, like my family on Thanksgiving did the Zoom Google Hangouts, play a digital game through jackbox.com or whatever it's called. My niece set it up. She's the engineer of the family. So there's 10 of us just playing this game on Thanksgiving, and most of my family minus my mom had not met my new partner. So we're meeting over Google Hangouts for the first time, playing with my daughter present in person, but everyone else just playing over this shared screen that we have the experience of in 2020.
Aw, I love that.
I
It
also
was
do
cool
that.
experience.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I do that a little bit like early on in dating someone. I'm like, okay, like, can we inhabit this playful space with each other? So even in little ways of like, someone will like make fun of me for something I said, or they'll be telling a story and I'll be like, ooh, like, can you do like an impression of the person? Or, you know, and just little things like doing impressions, like being silly, like doing funny accents, like all those things. I'm like, are you going to go there? And like, I did a couple summers ago, I did an improv training through UCB in LA, like just totally for fun, because it's all about being in the present moment. It's all about listening. It's all about getting rid of your own agenda and just, you know, being totally mindful and playful. And so even like little improv games, like we both say a word at the same time, and then we try to think of like what's the word in between that word, and then count to three, and then try to, and you keep doing that like over and over until you both say the same word. And it's really
Okay.
fun to kind of like go into this like goofy place, you know?
I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. One of the healthy versions of masculinity is play, being playful. And so I love that you're embodying that in the first part of maybe a dating experience. How does your date generally receive that game?
It's interesting. You know, like I've learned like you have to sort of make it safe for the other person. I can't be like, ooh, like let's do this and like let's do this right now. Right. But just sort of like laying it out there as an as an invitation, really, and not even a request. Right. And so, you know, like there's times where like someone will like laugh really hard at something I said, or like they'll be like, oh my God, you should have seen your face when you did that. And I'll be like, wait, like do an impression of me back to me so I can see it. And then they're like, they think about doing it, you know, but then they're like not quite comfortable enough. And I'm like, okay, it's okay. You know, like I'll ask like one more time and then just kind of let it be. But
Mm,
I think, you know, and when I feel that, then I'm like, okay, well, let me take my guard down a little bit, be a little bit silly, and like, you know, and then put out another invitation like later and stuff like that. But it's funny because the one person that I played that word game with, um, is like a super smart woman, like high achieving. She's in a highly professionalized sort of male dominated field. Like she had the hardest time getting there, but then was kind of like, oh, that was really fun. Like, I'm glad that you encouraged me to
mm.
kind of go there, you know?
That's really cool. And I hear something in there that's really classic to the helper personality type is just a little bit of self-deprecating humor where you're receiving the kind of joke about your facial expression and you're leaning into it.
Hmm.
And that can be a really attractive thing on the first few dates, is this like sarcasm goes a long way, but that self-deprecating humor for the two becoming integrated is a really fun thing to experience on a date.
Oh, that's like so validating. Thank you. I'm like, oh yeah, I guess that is a good thing that I do. Who knew?
Keep up the good work, Jared. I want to hear from Leanna though. Like, where do you sit in like playfulness or some things that have not been so successful when you're dating?
Well, I get bored really easily. So I always want to be doing something. Like I'm not a big like sit in front of the TV and just like binge. Although like if it's been like a long week, like I could do it, like if it's a really good show. But I want to like, go exercise or like play cards or do something like that's competitive because I'm very competitive. And that really works well with my current partner because he is also very fitness oriented and also doesn't watch like a ton of TV. So that works really well. In the past, that's something that has been kind of missing with other partners. I dated in eight. Actually, he was probably a 5 and 8 was his second number.
Okay.
But there was no fun. Like there was no fun in that relationship. And I was dying. And there were so many other like really good parts of it. But like, I asked him one time, I was like, do we laugh enough? Like, do you think we laugh enough in this relationship? And he got all mad at me that I even asked him that question. And in this current relationship, what are you laughing?
And that's just hilarious. Like, hey, I don't think we laugh enough. And to get like the most serious response in the world, like, how dare you? Like, what do you mean there's not enough laughing and silliness here?
I'm gonna double down on the seriousness.
Exactly.
And I mean,
and a relationship without fun for a 7 is just like hell on earth.
Oh yeah. It was, and there were other things in that relationship that I hadn't experienced before. And so that's what like drew me to it. But yeah, he was just, oh man, he was so serious. Every time we got together, it was a really serious conversation. And everything that I said that was like like joking, it would turn into like a fight. So obviously that relationship didn't go well. My partner when I was married, I think we had a good balance, but we had just different interests. I think that was just part of it. We were just so different people and we just didn't have enough of the same interests. So I found all of my things that I had fun in away from the marriage. Like that's, and that was one of the reasons that the marriage didn't work is, we ultimately just became different people. But no, I mean, sorry, go ahead.
In the beginning, it was like opposites attract. And then over time, those lack of common interests was the divisive factor.
It was part of the divisive factor. Yeah.
Sure. Of course.
Yeah.
But I also heard something very healthy in there for an anxiously attached is finding things that you're passionate in that aren't centered in the relationship. That was actually a really self-soothing, self-love kind of a way to approach your life at that time.
Well, so this is what's interesting is towards the end of my marriage, I actually became avoidant because my needs were never met. Like they were never met. And there was just it had gotten to a point where I just knew that me being vulnerable and coming and wanting to talk about things or being communicative, like it just wasn't going to be received well. And so I just found my own life and became pretty avoidant, but obviously it was probably a cover up for what I was like really feeling. And then when that marriage ended, then it was like anxious times like 10, which I'm still working on. So, because I am very, go ahead.
Were you familiar with Enneagram or the attachment theory during that relationship?
No. I learned about attachment theory first. and then the Enneagram. And attachment theory like struck a chord with me, and then the Enneagram struck a chord with me. And I was just like, because I think part of my 7 too is I love like the personality stuff and like what personality am I, and like literally every person in my life, not only every guy I've ever dated, but like all my friends. And I made Jared take it. Like I was like, guys, you got to take the Enneagram test. You got to figure out what you are. And so yeah, so now I'm aware of that. And I think I started kind of realizing how that was impacting me maybe like 2 years ago, I think.
Yeah. Collectively between the two is when that came together, or one or the other?
I think maybe, I don't remember. I
Mm-hmm.
just remember there was a point in my life where every time I'd meet a guy, I was like, okay, well, I need to know what their Enneagram is, and I need to know what their attachment style is.
It's a fair question.
Yeah, but what's also interesting is I showed up as a different Enneagram type. So I was going into these faux relationships. Faux relation. No, faux.
Is this new? I haven't heard of like faux relationships. No, that sounds sounds awful.
A faux relationship, like a relationship that's not a relationship.
Sure.
So
because it's behind pretense.
Yeah, because it's like hasn't actually formed into like a boyfriend girlfriend situation. And one, I always was a little bit more invested, and if I wasn't invested, I'd tell the person right away and like basically like be like, hey, sorry, I'm not into this, which is part of my 8. But I was going into these faux relationships as a 4. That's what I thought I was. I thought I was a 4, and which I have a lot of 4 in me for sure. But I don't think I realized the impact that the 7 had on the relationships, and which is why a 7 and a 5 would be a very difficult relationship to be a part of.
Yeah, there are a lot of similarities there, because when you're at your best, you're a lot like the investigator, where you can be the jack of all trades, master of none.
Mm-hmm.
And I resonate with the person that you were seeing at the time, because I'm an 8, but when I'm at my unhealthiest version, I am a 5, and all I want to know is the truth. Mm-hmm. So like, if you were talking about every time you got together was a serious conversation and very little laughter, I've been there before. I know what that's like.
Yeah.
Jared, how do you find that self-awareness and the Enneagram and attachment theory help you with like being conscious about compatibility?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, so it's really interesting, since the episode that you came on our show, Dave, like which prompted both Leanna and I to retake the Enneagram. And around the same time, I had read Attached like years ago and was like, okay, yeah. I was like, I think I'm anxious avoidant. And like you said a couple things in our podcast that like blew my mind. And even like I ran across something on Instagram recently that really broke down like fearful avoidant. And like everything that was on this post was like speaking straight into my soul. Like
same here.
Yeah, and it's wild. Well, and like I actually I'm pulling up the note in my phone, by the way, that
sure.
from what you said on the show, and then what Dr. Federick said like the day afterwards, that or our next show, that were so that were both so like mind-blowing for me. And now I'm not going to be able to find it. Are you kidding me? But I would say, I mean, to answer your question, I'm really sort of still on this journey, and what has been mind-blowing for me is recognizing that fearful avoidance, and that I sort of, there's a part of me that really craves that intimacy, and that once I get a taste of that, we'll like rush way ahead. We'll get really excited and throw caution to the wind and go for it. And then when the other person is like, yeah, like I'm interested, like let's go, like I'm yours, I'm in this too, then it feels like this terrifying, overwhelming responsibility of like, am I going to screw this up? And and having dated for a lot of years and feeling this switch flipping and not knowing why and feeling a lot of shame and guilt over that, um and like and of hurting people, right? So it's been nice to kind of like get some insight on that, and recognizing fearful avoidant and recognizing some of the Enneagram stuff has been huge for me in that.
I really want you to
same.
find that note.
I
Because
know.
I know
Okay.
what you're going to say. I'll talk while you find the note.
Okay, great. Fill time, Leanna.
So I think I have a little fearful avoidance as well. Because but I also, Dr. Morgan kind of pointed out, because I did her coaching program, and he kind of pointed out that she thinks when the avoidance comes up, it's really just, I'm so anxious, it's a cover up kind of a thing, which I don't know. Is that fearful avoidance?
It's very possible that it's protest behavior, where a lot of an anxiously attached person's protest behavior will be like a call for attention from their partner or from somebody that they're dating, is like, in a way, it's to push people away from them, like an avoidant, but the strategies are two different things between the styles. So anxiously attached have the protest behaviors, coming on too strong, feeling like they're too much for other people, and that pushes people away, which keeps them safe.
Can I tell you kind of what happened in my current relationship, and then you can tell me?
Yeah, that's absolutely. Okay. If it's comfortable for you to do so.
Oh yeah, for sure. So this has been a common theme for me, including my ex-boyfriend, which we only were together for like 3 months. But so what happens is kind of opposite of Jared. The guy is really excited about me, like really, really excited. And because they're so excited, I'm like, I don't know, but I'm going along with it because it's like exciting to have someone excited about me. But I'm like, I don't know if I'm like really attracted, or like, what if they have these things that like are they gonna hurt me? Like all of this different stuff. So what happened with my current relationship, and I warned him about this, I really did. I said, this is a cycle that I go through, is he initiated everything. The will you be my girlfriend, the I love you. And because I had this fearfulness to it, I was like, I need time before I answer. I need time before I say I love you back. And took that time, and then felt like really close and like, okay, I was ready to take that step. And so I did, and then freaked out and pulled back and like asked for space. And like, I've always been attracted to my partner now, but there's times where I lose my attraction to the person. And everything they do annoys me. And so then I back off and hurt them, right? And because they're hurt then, and now I have the space, then I'm like, oh, wait, hold on, take me back. Wouldn't that be avoidant?
Oh yeah, let me ask you a very specific question. Was this around like 2 or 3 months in?
3 weeks to a month.
3 weeks to a month.
Every time it's 3 weeks to a month. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so then that's definitely a pattern for the anxious avoidant or anxious attached, because of the cognitive dissonance that's going on in your head of like hyper focusing on the relationship. That's very overwhelming to you. Would you agree?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Say like in the first 3 weeks of like asking yourself this question, is it the right fit for me? Am I the right fit? And all these questions come up in our minds, and it's almost like this hamster wheel going in your brain that you just cannot control. Does that resonate?
Yes.
And what I hear in there is actually more of like the feminine chaos actually occurring.
Okay.
Right. So the masculine is like a mountain and the feminine is like the storm or the clouds that go around the top of the mountain. So the masculine is very solid and the feminine is very chaotic. And that's what happens with the feminine brain is just like, okay, let me ask myself these questions a lot over and over again. You throw in some anxious attachment in there, and now you've got a recipe for some trouble. But the question that the feminine is asking for answers in the story that you were telling me, this is what I'm hearing anyways, is that, am I safe with this person? Can this person meet my needs? Is this person hearing me? And can they be there for me? Which is a very natural progression in the first 3 to 4 weeks of a relationship, maybe even into 6 weeks, depending on how frequently you're seeing each other. And then when we get the polarity of the anxious and the avoidant being attracted to each other, then we have a little bit more chaos because the anxious comes from a different place. It's more like your gut. Your gut is kind of taking control there. So there's this constant battle going on between your head, your heart, and your gut. And I feel I'm kind of working through some things on my end of like kind of understanding how masculine feminine dynamics is actually a very good resolution to an anxiously attached and an avoidantly attached relationship.
Interesting. I've never heard the feminine masculine thing. I've never heard that before. Can you explain that really quick?
Yeah, of course. There's feminine and masculine energies within all of us, the yin and the yang, basically.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And much like the anxious and avoidant attachment style for me, it's a pendulum swing. So if my masculine and my feminine energies are flowing back and forth, sometimes they swing pretty wildly with that pendulum swing, but so do my anxiously and avoidant attachment styles because I'm a fearful avoidant. So what I do for myself in this case is I find things that self-soothe. Journaling is very good. I was reminiscing on this earlier today. Your story really resonates with me, Leanna, because about a year ago, I got into one of these situationships where it's not a relationship, we're not exclusive, but we see each other weekly. And my anxious attachment style was just ignited. It was activated like that. And it came with a lot of pendulum swing back and forth. And what I wanted to give myself applause for earlier today is that the way that I took care of myself and self-soothed during that experience was exactly what an anxiously attached person should do in that situation. Of like, I'm not making excuses for this potential partner of mine, but I am also being sort of pragmatic and cautious as I approach the relationship by getting very curious and like, hey, how do you like to date? Do you like to date more than one person at a time, or do you like to date one person at a time? And my self-soothing when I wasn't there was just like, no, reassuring myself that no matter what happens, I'm still going to be okay. And then finding things that I'm passionate about, like work, and passionate about the podcast, and passionate about sharing the benefits of fitness and nutrition for mental health. Like, as long as I self-soothe with those things, the pendulum swing is a lot smaller back and forth. And the yin and the yang are very similar in how we go from chaos to groundedness or solidarity between the masculine and the feminine.
I think, and all of those things sound amazing. It's just so much harder done. You know, it's like when you're in that anxious spin, it is so hard to get out of that. I mean, I still like, I know my partner loves me, but like if he's being a little like short in his texts while he's at work, I'm like, he doesn't love me. We're going to break up tonight, you know? And then if I feed off of that, then he's like, what? Calm down, you know, which is his avoidant, right? And then that spins my anxiousness. It's just so, it's hard. It's just so hard.
I actually am curious about that question that you were going to ask Jared, because I want to hear his opinion. But like, our goal when that happens long term, and then for ourselves and then for our partnership, is to earn that security that we are safe in this relationship. And that's back to Jared's point earlier of like, we're learning so much more about ourselves while we're not in a relationship. And then when we get back in a relationship, now we're progressing on to the next level of education. It's almost like the PhD in self-awareness at that point. And we can earn security in a relationship that will kind of diminish those thoughts of, oh, we're going to end it tonight. I just don't know what he's saying in these texts, even though he's at work. And that was a little moment of self-soothing for you. I was like, oh no, it's okay. He's at work. He just has a moment. I'm so grateful for my partner responding in this time. I'll catch up to him later tonight. I know that's possible tonight.
I like that.
So Jared, what stands out? Go ahead, Leanna, ask that question.
I was going to ask Jared, like when I was telling my psychotic experiences and beginnings of my relationships, of where I was like, I don't know. And then like all in. And then I'm like, whoa. And then because I hurt the person, then I'm like, wait, take me back. Like, how does that resonate with you? Like, how does that look differently or the same for you?
See, that's familiar to me. And I feel like you and I have talked about this, and some of this might be right because you have strong two also, is like what I resonate with that. And it's like you and I feel like have talked about this before, Leanna, and we've used the word like disclaimers where, so I like the experience that came to mind as you were telling that story about like being all in, all excited, and then needing to pull back and then letting the other person know like, hey, I'm a little bit pulled back here, or I'm a little bit unsure, or I know this has been exciting and has been moving really fast, but like there's this other part of me that like really doesn't know you and it's really not sure what's going to happen. And sort of like once that's expressed and the other person receives it and you realize there's space for you to be unsure, like that part of you can show up too, that by itself is automatically such a relief that you like rush back in to get really close to them again. So like my version of that is like a year ago, I was dating somebody around this time and we got really excited about each other. There was strong chemistry. And then I had to travel for work. And before I left, we sort of made plans to spend the weekend together when I got back, you know, hey, like, let's go into, you know, we'll get an Airbnb somewhere and whatever. And while I was away, I was like, oh no, like, I don't really know this person, like whatever. I started getting freaked out. And I called her and I was like, hey, I just wanted to talk to you. Like, I was like, I've been thinking about stuff and whatever. And I was like, where I am ultimately is like, I would still like to spend the weekend with you, but I want you to know that like, I'm not totally sure like where we are or where I see this going. And if that's okay with you and you still, you know, if knowing that you still want to spend the weekend with me, then great. But I kind of like need you to know that. And to her credit, she was like, yeah, I don't know where this is going either. And like, yeah, I still want to spend the weekend with you. And just the freedom that part of me could show up was like great. And then we had a fantastic weekend together. So
I love hearing that. And is that what support feels like? Is that what that sounds like?
I mean, and it's because I think there's a part of me that's sort of so scared of like, oh, I have to show up for the person. And when they're really sure and excited about me, I have to be really sure and excited about them. And if I'm not, then all of a sudden that's going to like throw a wrench in the machine and it's all going to blow up, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I think the difference though, between you and me is you're the pursuer in the beginning and I'm not. Like the other person is like really excited about me. And I'm like I'm excited that they're into me and like I want to spend time with them, but I'm not the one that's like initiating it.
Yeah, I think that's
and that's
true.
okay. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Because for me, yeah, there's the shift for me that is really difficult for me to navigate that happens in dating relationships is when it shifts from like I'm winning the person over to now I've won them over, right? When they're like, I'm in, I like you, I'm yours, like whatever. And then I'm like, oh no. When really I've been launching this like campaign to have exactly that, right? And so I've got the note up on my phone because Dave, what you said on our podcast, you said my biggest fear in relationship is being betrayed, controlled, manipulated, and possessed. And when you said that, I like broke out into a sweat because it was like, it like really struck a chord deeply with me. And then the next episode we did with Dr. Frederick, she said, if I let anyone, she was talking, I think she was talking about codependency here. And she was saying like the script is if I let anyone get too close to me, they're going to want to control me. They're going to want me to take care of them. They're going to be dependent on me. If I get too close to somebody, I am then responsible for them. And Leanna and I were actually in the same space when we were recording that. And I just looked at her with like this look of like pain and shock and horror and amazement on my face of like, oh my God, you just said exactly what's in my heart and what I've grappled with in so many relationships for so long.
Mm-hmm. Man, that was a big takeaway from when we look into codependency and narcissism and the Enneagram, we just see so much more opened up in front of us. And what you were describing earlier that I heard about that weekend away with your potential partner was a really intimacy. Like you were sharing something intimate about yourself, painful and vulnerable. And it was a question mark, and that's okay. That deepens intimacy at different points in a relationship. First date, that's really hard. That's not going to be received very well. 5 dates in, maybe that's received a little bit better because that opens up the space for the other person to step in and say, I'll step up to that or I'll step out, and they'll excuse themselves. And that's great also, because we don't want that person to be our partner anyways. But for us as like anxiously attached, avoidantly attached, the best course of action is to find a secure partner. And that's what I heard when you're describing the person's response to your share.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was tremendously like comforting, you know? Yeah.
So I know that your time is valuable, guys, and I don't want to take much more of it because we've had a riotous conversation for the last hour or so. So hit me with some closing thoughts. What do you want to leave our audience with today? Leanna, you're up first.
Oh, I don't want to go first. Jared, you go first.
Jared, you're up.
Okay. I mean, I think what I will say is like what I would say to anyone is like I think being on this journey of self-awareness and self and to me actually the more I talk to people like you, Dave, and Dr. Frederick and Dr. Morgan and all these people, the more I realize like that the work is all about like getting to a place of self-acceptance and self-love. And you and I, Dave, talked a little bit about shadow work, right? The last time. And and that idea of like even those things that we are really trying to change about ourselves, it's this crazy paradox of like you're like, well, I'm trying to change my life. I'm trying to do things differently because I don't like the way I used to do things. And then all of a sudden someone says, well, the key to all of this is like loving and accepting yourself exactly as you are right now is kind of like how that all works. And it's like, wait, what? No, but I'm trying to change. It's like, yeah, this is how you change. And so that's the journey.
Personal growth is definitely not linear, is it?
Yeah, no. And so it's still hard for me. It's still like I went from, 2-3 weeks ago, I was talking to 3 different people that I was really excited about, which was like not typical for me. And like now that number is 0, and it's a freaking roller coaster ride. And what has been really helpful for me and I'm still working on is like, how do I cultivate that sort of strong, quiet place inside of myself that can weather the ups and downs, right? That can get excited about a relationship without going on tilt into way too much anxiousness, into not setting boundaries, into disregarding other aspects of my life. And how can I take the space I need without going on tilt into like being scared and avoidant and just burying my head in the sand, and hoping that things will go away while I'm not there, So I don't know. I guess that's what I would leave people with, is just like keep going. Like it's not linear. And also like it's about accepting and loving in this really, like, wrapping your arms around all of it, like even the stuff that you don't like when it shows up, kind of. I think.
Yeah, well said. Well said.
Damn it. I should have gone first. No, I mean, just to like add on to what Jared said very eloquently, Jared and I have done a lot of the work, like years of therapy, reading all the books, and then trying to practice that in our situationships and in our relationships, and still dealing with it. Like, I am still very anxious in my relationship. And like Jared said, like, I have to have self-compassion for myself, that like, that's okay. Like, there is trauma that I'm still dealing with, things that I'm still discovering about myself that I didn't know. And even in that anxiousness and in the pain that I feel in my relationship, it's really pain that's coming up from past things that I'm still, haven't really uncovered. And so even in the relationship that maybe you feel like, quote unquote, you're failing in, or the situationship, or the fact that you're single, like, every aspect of our life, we're growing as people. And when we stop being curious about it, like, that's when we stop growing. And so we say this a lot, but it's really important to feel the feelings that you're feeling, and to be okay with feeling those feelings, because when you sit in the pain, like, that's when you move forward from it. And so I think just knowing that pain is okay. We're all dealing with our own shit. And we have to have compassion for ourselves, and we have to have compassion for our partners, because they're dealing with shit too. And so, like, not only do we need to develop the empathy for ourselves, but we also need to extend that empathy to others. And I think, if you continue to practice and be okay with, like, it taking a really long time, like, it will get better.
Yeah, that describes the last few years of my life. And if I had quit when I wanted to quit, the 400 times that I wanted to quit, that would have been okay, not acceptable to me, unless I started up again. And we can quit for the day if we've done too much work, and we can pick it up again tomorrow on the personal growth work.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, and that's why I'm so grateful for, like, people like you, Dave, and your show, and all these people that we've name checked today, because, and I think you're a great example of, like, a teacher and an expert and a healer in all of these ways that are so important. But also, like you said about me not being a clinician, like, I think you're able to lead and guide people through your show by your vulnerability, by showing parts of your shadow and all of that. And I think that's that's so hugely helpful and hugely important. And at the times in our show when Leanna and I do, you know, like we're a little bit more on the other end of the spectrum where it's like, well, we're figuring this out and we're going to go talk to the experts. But occasionally we'll have like, yeah, we've been through the ringer on this stuff, a lot of stuff. So we might like give some advice now and then, but it's usually coming from this place of like, when we are talking to, when we're sort of sharing something, we're really still talking to ourselves and like kind of crystallizing it for ourselves. We're like, yeah, I think this is true. Yeah, that's true. And it's funny. I was laughing earlier because Leanna did the thing that she and I always do, which is when we're talking to a guest, we're like pretending like we're asking insightful interview questions for the sake of our guests. And we're really just working out our own shit and like getting opinions from people.
Why do you think I went out and found some experts that would be willing to come talk to me on a weekly basis?
Exactly. Yeah. You're like, so for my audience, what would you say if you're a 40-year-old guy with a daughter who's trying to date and having this problem?
Yeah, that's where the disclosure comes in, and it's a huge value for the listener. It's like, okay, let's just talk about my life, just for a moment, you know, and it definitely helps me along my way. So therefore, we can be ahead of and lead the community that we want to build. I think that's why Leanna started her podcast and asked you to join along. And that's certainly why I started the one over here, is to go on my own journey, have people come along with me, and they can stop and restart whenever they want. But as long as I'm doing this for myself, but not by myself, then I feel a whole lot more confident.
Yeah. Well, I think it's fucking awesome what you're doing. And I'm so glad that you're out there like doing your thing. And I know so many people like the two of us have gotten so much from it. So
well, thank you very much.
Yeah, we appreciate you.
Oh, thank you very much. That means a lot. And if people want to get a hold of you and they want to listen to your podcast, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah. So find us on Instagram at Hello and Goodbye Podcast. And then they can also go to our website, www.helloandgoodbyepodcast.com. They can find the episodes there, our YouTube channel, our social media, and like some fun stuff about me and Jared too. And you can find us on all. What'd you say?
You've got mugs, right?
Oh yeah, we have merch. Yep, we have merchandise that you can order from the website.
Well, and just to add to that, yeah, follow us on all the channels. You can also follow us personally. Like we're really, we love like interacting with listeners and stuff like that. So I'm at The Real Jared Rodriguez with an S. Leanna, you're at
_Leanna Joan.
_Leanna Joan.
Yeah. Oh, and what I was going to say is we're on all podcast platforms, so you can find us anywhere. Yeah. Okay. And obviously, I'd recommend like go listen to Dave's episode first, which is one of our recent ones. Yeah, one of our recent runs is called "Discovering Yourself Through the Enneagram." So, go support Dave.
I feel all the love from you guys and from our community too. I just want to say thank you again for joining me. Very insightful conversation today.
Yeah.
And I'll talk to you guys soon.
Okay. Thanks for having us. Bye.
Bye.